Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? I guess we don't really have a quorum to approve minutes, so we can approve the minutes at our next meeting next week. Thank you very much, Karen, for rushing to get those done and sent out. So I know, Jeff, you sent out some information earlier today, and I'm not sure if others had a chance to look at that.
Sure, and we'll review some of that this evening. I thought it might be helpful just for a little bit of background about the discussion tonight.
Mhm.
Jean, if it's okay, I thought I would just offer a brief review of some of the information that we've been talking about over the most recently the past few weeks, but really over the last couple of years, and then leave some time available for questions and comments. We're preparing to submit to the HDC again early next week.
Mhm.
Now, unfortunately, our architect at the last minute had a conflict. So I'm going to do my best to share my screen with the information. If I press share, do you need to give me permission, Jean, or?
You'll have to try it because I'm not actually the host since
Okay.
the town sets these up. And I
All
don't
right.
see Jeremy on the meeting.
Can
But
anybody see the PowerPoint on the screen right now?
no.
Oh, come on, really? Okay, it's up on my screen.
Well,
the meeting.
maybe.
Let me try one. I've got one more approach. Excuse
Okay.
me.
Oh, there we go.
That might work.
Yeah, that works.
That,
Okay.
that will work.
All right. Well, good. I don't have a cursor. I'm on an iPad, but I'll scroll through, and then maybe we'll just hold off on questions until after the short presentation, and then we can really kind of dig into your thoughts and so on. So thank you again, everybody.
Okay.
On short
Jeff,
notice.
I would just ask, because we've seen the scenarios, that you just sort of try to summarize.
That's all I'm doing. I'm only
Great.
presenting
Okay.
the relative information tonight. Okay, so very quickly, just to set the context, up on the screen right now is the approved on-street parking design. So this shows two accessible spaces in line with all of the other parking spaces on the library side of Main Street. It's similar to the current accessible parking downtown. That's been approved by the HDC and the ZBA. More recently, we changed that design as a result of some feedback that we've received from the Committee on Disabilities about a concern for the driver's side. So this is a similar design, but if you look at it carefully, the hashed area below the two wheelchair symbols, it's an 8-foot wide strip that is the space where cars are parked along Main Street. So this design effectively pushes the two spaces closer to the library, closer to 151 Main Street, allowing that 8-foot buffer zone on the driver's side of each of these spaces on Main Street. Very quickly, this we're referring to as option 2B, or the buffered on-street parking spaces. The pros are, on the driver's side, there's an 8-foot striped space before the travel lane of traffic. It offers the largest landscape area. It actually gains one on-street parking space in the area of the library. It is minimal change from previously approved HDC and ZBA. There are some bollards that are required on the sidewalk, but I don't think that's a big concern. At the recent HDC meeting that many of you attended, the chair commented that he wanted to, he liked the option 5 of on-site parking, and this is that particular design. Of the on-site parking spaces, there were a few designs that had 3 spaces. This one had 2, and it pushed those spaces further away from the library to allow a buffer zone of landscaping adjacent to the library. The pros and cons of option 5 are reuses the existing curb cut. It's the largest landscaped area of the off-street parking options, and it was not anticipated to adversely affect the large tree on site. The cons are there is more limited landscape area than the on-street options that have been approved. It does limited space for landscape buffer between the street and the parking area because we push those spaces close to the street. The off-street parking requires backing up in a high pedestrian traffic area by the new entrance, and there's difficult maneuvering if a vehicle enters when all the spaces are occupied. I would say also that we've looked at the history of Fowler, which came up in discussion at the HDC meeting, and folks said that's a relatively easy area to park. I would note that there have been 3 accidents in that parking area in the last 8 years with people backing up. There's been some concern about backing up not being as safe, and actually the police have a record of 3 different accidents at the Fowler parking lot. And we have some concern because this is also a travel area for people walking into the library on that adjacent path. We did also spend some time with the engineers earlier, I guess last week, looking at changing this design to a 1 space on site, 1 parking space on site, and 1 parking space still on the street. But the engineers and the architects were, despite the fact we developed some sketches, were very critical of that because of a safety concern. They have a point of convergence on the street, and it, relative to the HDC's concerns about asphalt on the landscaped area, it only eliminates the area that's occupied by one of the wheelchair icons here. All of the rest of the asphalt would need to remain on site. So that option that was suggested by one of the HDC members to just have 1 on site, 1 on street just didn't really work. The library board has spent a lot of time talking about this since the last HDC meeting and are concerned that we don't have support for from the HDC for off-street parking. And there's also been discussion about the on-street parking distance versus the on-site. This parking, option 2B, actually is 85 feet from the door, from the middle of the 2 parking spaces. It's 5 feet further for option 5 that was discussed at the last HDC meeting. It's actually 90 feet for this design. From the center here to up is approximately 90 feet. From the parking spaces here to the doors, approximately 85 feet. And I would note there was some discussion at the HDC meeting and with other meetings that we've had. We sent this back, all of these designs back to the parking engineers. And that was some of the information I forwarded earlier. And I wanted to reference this one paragraph that we received recently from the engineer addressing the safety issue. And Jeffrey Dirk comments, the proposed design affords a sufficient offset 8 feet from the traveled roadway along Main Street to allow for the parking spaces to function in a safe manner and exceeds the standards of section R310, passenger loading zones of the ADA, offering an additional level of safety for users of the parking spaces. So, Gene, that's a quick update of the relative designs we've looked at recently. And I'm not sure, I'm not sure how we answer questions if we raise hands who calls on folks, but I'll leave that up to you.
Okay, thank you. So I certainly, the other members of the commission will have comments and questions. But I would like to say, when I got the email from you this afternoon, I was pretty discouraged with the message there. And I feel like, you know, we've kind of said that the on-street parking could meet the ADA standards. I think that we understand that. But you've spent a lot of effort and you'll be spending a lot of money to build an addition to the library, which is beautiful and accessible. You've shown it to us. We've talked about, you know, this little tweak, that little tweak, which those were done. And we've thought it's a beautiful design that's very accessible to people. But when you end up with parking that, yes, it minimally meets the ADA, but people don't feel safe or don't feel truly welcome or included, that they're not going to use the new library. They're going to continue to go to Fowler or, you know, do things virtually or whatever. That's my biggest concern. I feel like that concern has not been heard by the Library Corporation.
Well,
So
thank you, Gina.
that's my personal comment, and I'm sure others have some comments as well.
Well, thank you, Gina. I wonder if I could just chat a little bit more about that. Thank you for expressing that. So you commented that the design to be would minimally meet the standards. I guess the approved design, that description might be okay. In the 2B option, where we push the entire parking scheme, the normal accessible parking type spaces that downtown has or Thoreau Street has, we pushed it 8 feet further away from the street. So there's a full parking space outside where a van would park. And I don't think that's minimally meets the standards. I think it far exceeds the standards. What do you think on that?
Yeah, Jennifer, please.
Can you hear me?
Can you put your volume up a bit?
Yeah. Sorry, can you hear me now?
That's great.
Much better.
Okay, super. Actually, 8 feet is the minimum required. You can't have it any less than 8 feet because you're required to have a van accessible space. And the van accessible space is required to have an 8-foot unloading zone. And
On the
so
street side?
on one side.
Yes, it does it on both.
No, so let me explain. So when you're on the street, if you have a van that unloads on the left, on the driver's side, the van will pull in closest to the curb and use the space on the left of the van to unload. And if you know what a handicap van looks like, it has often a ramp that unloads out the side and folds out. And so if the ramp that unfolds is on the right side, the passenger side, then the van will pull into the left side of the space. So 8 feet is what is required for a van unloading zone. And so you are required to have at least one van accessible space. So in fact, it is a minimum scheme. There's not an extra inch in here that is over and above what is minimally required for the project.
Jennifer, I'm confused, and I know you know a lot about this. So is there another space in town, anywhere in Concord, that has 8 feet on both sides of an accessible parking space?
So I'm not telling you that you need 8 feet on both sides. You need 8 feet on one side in addition to an 8-foot wide parking spot.
Exactly. And that's actually, you're describing the approved design that has been approved by the ZBA and the HDC. And what 2B does is addresses the comments we've heard from the Committee on Disability about space on the driver's side. So 2B has 8 feet on the left and 8 feet on the right.
Right. So let's go back. So from the curb line out into the street, you have allocated in 2B 16 feet.
24 feet in 2B. 24 feet.
Are you including the sidewalk?
Why don't I go back to the design? This is 2B that was presented a little while ago. I'll see if I can share my screen again.
Oh, yeah, please do.
Jennifer, I think we're getting feedback from your computer.
Yeah,
Okay, Jennifer, can you see the screen? Hello?
I can.
yeah,
Okay,
Jennifer's nodding
so-
yes.
I'm just going to go through this quickly again. What's on the screen right now is the approved design that was approved a year or so ago by the HDC and the ZBA. So this shows 2 van spaces that are in line with all the other cars. And the hatched area is an 8-foot accessible space on the right side of where a van might park. Now, this design, pardon me. This design shows 8 feet on the left side, just the way the approved design does, but it adds 8 feet on the driver's side of the van space. So this design, option 2B, is 24 feet wide.
Actually, it's only 16 feet wide. You can't include the sidewalk.
The sidewalk has been established at the same plane as the parking space, and it's all concrete. So it is an approved offloading design. And I'm sorry the architect isn't here to review that, but we'd be glad to follow up with you offline about that.
No need. There's really no need. Again, if you want to talk semantics, that's fine. Really what we're talking about here is from the curb line out, you have 16 feet. That is a minimum required.
Yeah,
so it feels a little disingenuous that in your letter and in tonight's presentation, you're just trying to make the point that you've gone above and beyond when actually this is exactly at the bare minimum. Using the sidewalk is going to be difficult because you're going to have bollards that prevent the vehicles from driving up onto the sidewalk by accident. And so the bollards potentially could interfere with any kind of van unloading ramp that you might have. So does it meet the letter of the law? Absolutely, it does. But that's really all it does, is meet the letter of the law.
Okay, we'll be glad to follow up in more detail. Thanks for those comments.
Other members have comments, questions? Yes, Meryl.
I was struck by the fact that, and disappointed as Jean was, with the fact that there's been so much work that has been done on these plans, and yet there's like a basic premise that the Commission on Disabilities wishes are not going to be heeded. And there's, I really don't know how to get across to the HDC at this point that the basic idea was to make the library into a community gathering place, and to make that possible, it needs to provide in-house parking, just as Fowler does. Fowler has a meeting room, and when people come to the meetings there, they appreciate having those 2 on-site parking spaces, because I'm one of those people. And I can tell you that what Jean was alluding to is a reality that that the HDC is putting blinders on. That the reality is that if you want the community to feel that the library is accessible to them, there needs to be on-site parking. And by putting it on the street, you will be preventing people, and this is just, across the board. There is not much truly accessible parking in Concord Center or West Concord. It's all on-street parking with very few exceptions. And people do not perceive that Concord is a very parking-friendly place for those with disability, with mobility disabilities. I can't say strongly enough that you are making a terrible mistake. The HDC would be making a terrible mistake to create this wonderful meeting space and be literally preventing community members from really participating in activities there. I will not be able to use the library with any degree of comfort if I have to park on the street. And that's my reality.
Jane Hotchkiss, you have a comment?
I think
Yeah,
Meryl kept referring to HDC, and I think she means the library, right?
Well,
Not
this
the
is a call in preparation for submittal to the HDC, and the HDC has seen the on-site parking versions 5 or 6 times and has consistently not supported those alternatives.
Jeff, I know I'm the liaison. 1 second, Mario. I'm the liaison to the HDC as well. So my point is simply, I would refer to the library at this point versus assuming, unless we have a three committee meeting, which might be very useful, but I'm just saying, otherwise we don't have somebody here from the HDC.
True. But excuse me.
Go ahead, Meryl.
I was just going to say that I am assuming that this plan was going to be presented on next week to the HDC for their approval. And it's sort of, this has been a lesson in futility for the commission, I think, to be consulted and been told, in so many words, your opinion is not valued, and it's an insult. I'm sorry.
Mario, I know you've been wanting to speak.
Well, I just want to make a comment. I guess you all know I'm a member of the library board. And I just kind of want to review some facts. First of all, in response to the discussions that we've had and the desire for on-street parking or off-street parking, we presented 3 plans with parking on site. The HDC hasn't viewed them as acceptable. So the fact that
Right.
we have done that means that we have listened and we've tried. Then at the last meeting or 2 meetings ago, whatever, someone mentioned how nice Fowler was. And we had sort of not really focused on the traffic patterns and what happens at Fowler. So we went back to take a look at what's happened at Fowler. There have been 3 accidents, fortunately, and that's since 2012. Now, fortunately, no one has been hurt. 2 of them were accidents that had to do with knocking down a neighbor's fence that's there. But one of them, the most recent one, was pretty dramatic. Someone pulled into a parking space, knocked over the handicap sign and bent the bike rack. And then to try and get out, put the car in reverse, went clear across the parking lot, and there were two parked cars on the other side. It smashed one, took that one and smashed it into the second car. And the damage was so severe that the cars had to be, at least one of it had to be towed away. So we started looking at this and said, okay, there's parking at Fowler and it is convenient, but we have a new scenario, and that is that we're going to have a situation where we're going to have women, children, people with strollers going in to that part of the library that's the connector. There's going to be a sidewalk that's going to have a lot of traffic. So we have to deal with the balancing act. The balancing act is what's the risk here? I have a lovely grandson and whatever. I just hate to think that inadvertently someone will back up a car while there's a stroller or a kid in that parking lot doing a back and forth turn, and the car gets loose and somebody really gets hurt. So we have listened, we have tried, we sort of didn't really focus on Fowler and what's happening there. You know, accidents don't happen every day, but we don't want to be in a position where we try and deal with one problem and cause another problem. So these are just observations, they're just some facts, but we have listened. The design that's being proposed is a safe design. Maybe it wouldn't be as convenient as possible, but on-site poses its own risks. So I just want to lay out some thoughts, and every once in a while I get a knot in the pit of my stomach of thinking about somebody inadvertently backing up and running somebody over.
Jennifer, did you have a comment? And then Ned.
Yeah, just real quickly, how many spots are at Fowler Library?
2.
There are just 2 spots. Are they both ADA spots?
Yes.
Okay. So the problem, Mario, that you're describing is a design problem. It's not a problem of accessibility or where to put the ADA parking spaces. It's a design problem, and a designer needs to figure out how to separate the pedestrian and the vehicular traffic. So I think that's something that could easily be resolved. I think the bigger problem here is that the design of option 5, I think it is being shoehorned into our purview, because that is what is the Historic Districts Commission apparently thinks is the appropriate solution. So I don't think using accidents happening at Fowler is an appropriate argument not to have ADA parking on site. So that's the first point. The second point, let me just finish. Men go to the library besides just women and children and strollers. The third point that I'd like to make is that is that right now, I don't know, Jeff, do you know if any of the parking that is currently ADA parking, is it dedicated to the library with a sign? Because on-street parking will be available unless there's signage. It will be available to anyone who needs parking, even if they aren't using the library. And from what I understand, I think the lot over at the Umbrella is also, not signed specifically for the library. Do you know how they're, if the spots are dedicated to the library in any way?
I don't think the ones at the Umbrella are, although they're of course adjacent to, as close as you can get to the library. But we could, and we've discussed before that when that lot is being redone, we've lobbied for a third space over there. There are currently 2, and I think the town is going to add a third space. However, we know from everybody who's on this call that parking at that lot is less than ideal because you need to cross Sudbury Road. But we would also be willing to talk to the town about dedicating them for the library. That's a very good point.
I just want to say, I was just trying to make an observation in terms of trying to put the whole situation in context. I mean, I understand your position, and but it was with that aim in mind that I sort of set out the various aspects of what we're trying to do and what the pros and cons are. That's just what I wanted to make sure we were all focused on.
Ned, did you have a comment? Ned Perry?
I have a comment. By my phone, my phone never rings, and it's ringing now, so I apologize for it. And my comments were really focused on Jeff's option 5, and certainly appreciate the library's efforts to develop some off-street parking. I do think every presentation they've made to the HTC have presented airplane runway options that really don't get the discussion any further. And I hope that from what I hear of the commission's discussion tonight, there doesn't seem to be agreement with any of the options here. And a year ago, it was represented that the commission had approved, and of course they hadn't. And so I hope there won't be any comments to the effect in front of the HTC by the corporation that the commission has agreed with any of this. It does, and Mario's comments are helpful because it would reinforce what I would suggest you do with option 5, which is sort of follow Sandy Smith's suggestions and put the parking facing towards the Haywood Benjamin House, put some ballards along there. So if they're driving into the space, they're not going to drive up onto the sidewalk and hit anybody, but the backing up would be towards the tree where there won't be people. And it would seem to me, based upon what Mario's saying, that would be a safer option. But I was watching a video of Valerie Fletcher, who's executive director of the Institute of Human-Centered Design, earlier today. And she said this whole issue about accessibility comes down to attitude. And most people are unwilling to accept an attitude that we're going to get old and be handicapped at some point. And so they just don't sort of understand accessibility. I will do further research with her writings and her center, but I do hope the library will afford one last look at off-street parking, because it's what I hear from the commission and from many, many people throughout the community who probably didn't know of this hearing tonight or this session tonight, is they need the off-street parking to get into the library. Thank you very much, Jean.
You're welcome. So other commissioners have comments? Yes, Karen.
You're muted.
Yeah, I do not have personal experience with using handicapped parking spaces, but when I looked at this design, it terrified me because and just in my experience of driving down Main Street with kind of crazy traffic, and despite that 8-foot buffer, to me it would be frightening to have to unload somebody from a van into that space and still have to deal with traffic. And the other confusion, maybe I don't understand well enough, but the bollards that will be on the sidewalk side would seem to me to impede foot traffic as well as anybody exiting from their vans. So I can't, from the design that I'm looking at, I can't tell how closely spaced or what they actually would look like in reality. But this just seems not at all accessible, and seems to kind of defeat the purpose in my mind. And I would definitely agree with trying to revisit a different design for the on-site parking that would allow people to safely transverse that space. That's all. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Meryl. You're muted, Meryl.
I just wanted to ask Jeff a quick question. Ned's suggestion of moving the parking to the opposite side, I wondered if that could be an easy fix, because it just seems like that would accommodate an off-street option much better than on the left-hand side. There's more room for a buffer when you're coming down the street, to satisfy the HDC members who, want more greenery. But I truly think that that option, I'm wondering if you had considered that option of just moving it to the other side and further, so it would be a little bit easier.
Yeah, thank you for that observation and question, Meryl. Sandy Smith actually spent a fair amount of time and developed two options that had parking, as Ned alluded to, in that direction. And we have reviewed those at the HDC meetings. I don't have those pros and cons right now, but the architects and traffic consultants did express some challenges about that. Among other things, the access into the parking area would need to go where a telephone pole is right now, and a little bit closer to the tree, requiring some different grading issues adjacent to that heritage yellowwood tree. But we can look back at that. There were some other benefits to that Sandy's design as well. And I think you've just picked up on, Ned did as well, about the safety concern expressed by Mario. So there are a lot of moving pieces, and all of you and the corporation board has spent a lot of time looking at the various pros and cons. And I think it was addressed at the HDC recently that there doesn't seem to be a perfect design that meets everybody's criteria, and there'll be a balance of issues, and we're all working together trying to come up with the most reasonable and accommodating design we can. So looks like we're going to stay at it for a little bit. The board is currently supportive of given all of the issues we've had, of option 2 with the enhanced buffer zone. And we've spent a lot of time talking about it, but there is a little bit more time before we go back to the HDC. So I thank all of you for joining us tonight and for these comments. I've carefully written them down, and I'll share with our board and the architects tomorrow. I would also say that if you have any other comments, feel free to pass them along to Jean or directly to me, and we'll stay at it. We're at the HDC next week, and I don't recall, is that Thursday night?
Yes,
I think it is, yeah.
it is.
So we'll look forward to another exciting conversation.
Jeff, I have one last question. As the HDC discussion ended last time, my understanding was that they had requested that the Library Corporation take a look at a scenario where there would be one on-site parking space and either 1 or 2 on street as well. And I'm just wondering, did your design team take a look at that as an option?
Yes, I apologize. I discussed that during my presentation, but may not have been clear. We did spend a fair amount of time looking at that, and there were 2 issues that came up, specifically from the architects and the engineer, that the point of egress or entrance with the spaces on street and on site would be a point of conflict and was not a safe design. They were quite adamant about that. And the second issue was in terms of the amount of asphalt on site that is a concern from the HDC, it only eliminated actually one space that was denoted by the wheelchair symbol. So it, for all intents and purposes, had just as much asphalt because you needed the turnaround and whatnot. So we, in fact, I drew a sketch trying to make it work, and the engineers did, and it just wasn't a workable design, unfortunately.
And do you think that the HDC is aware that it does not have to be asphalt? It can be a material that is much more attractive and would blend much better than typical black asphalt.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. And that has been discussed and referred to as rusticated asphalt, where you pour an emulsion down and roll a gravel in afterwards. And there are a number of homes on Main Street in the historic districts that have that type of surface. And you're absolutely right. They would much prefer that. And that's come up at the meetings. Although in general, they don't want to see asphalt, as I think we've all heard, on site.
Okay, any last comments or questions?
All right, thank you again for everybody for your feedback. We'll stay at it.
Okay, thank you all. And HDC, or sorry, COD commissioners, we do have our regular meeting next Thursday at 5 p.m. And the HDC meeting next Thursday, I believe, is at 7. So thank you all for your time tonight.
Yes, thank you for making time tonight. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.